They targeted a single mom and an autistic man, thinking they'd fold in silence. But his quiet move broke their plan, and what happened next changed everything. Ava's apartment in Columbus, Ohio, smelled like reheated soup and damp laundry that never fully dried. The heater clicked like it wanted to start, then gave up, leaving a thin coldness along the baseboards. She sat at a wobbling kitchen table with a stack of envelopes spread like a bad hand of cards. Her son's backpack leaned against a chair, one strap half torn, quietly announcing how often they had been forced to make it work. She stared at the return addresses and felt that familiar heat of shame, as if debt were a light aimed straight at her face. She told herself to breathe slowly, but her body didn't cooperate. Stress made time feel jagged, like every second had an edge. She opened the first envelope and read the same line twice, not because she didn't understand, but because her mind refused to accept it. Past due. Final notice. Her stomach clenched as she pictured her son in a new school again, standing in front of strangers with that brave little smile that always arrived late. She folded the letter, unfolded it, then folded it again, trapped in a loop that felt safer than making a decision. In the bedroom, her son slept with one hand curled near his cheek, eyelashes resting like soft commas. Ava watched him from the doorway and felt love and fear braid together until she couldn't tell them apart. She wanted to promise him stability the way other parents promise dessert, casual and sure. But stability had become something you bought with money and luck, and she had been running out of both. A memory rose without permission. Another apartment, another landlord, the sound of a door shutting behind her while she held her child and tried not to cry. She stepped back as if the past could hear her. Across the hall lived Noah. Most people in the building called him weird, with the lazy confidence of those who never paid for their words. Ava had seen him in the laundry room, moving with careful precision, sorting colors as if the world might collapse if he didn't. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his sentences came measured, like each one had to pass through a narrow gate. She noticed the way he avoided the elevator when it was crowded, the way his shoulders jumped at sudden laughter. And she noticed something else, something harder to explain. He never looked away from someone who was struggling. That evening, Ava stepped into the hallway with a trash bag in her hand, and Noah's door opened and closed softly, like a held breath. He stood near his door, placing a neat line of ear defenders on a small shelf, one after another, the ritual precise and calming. The hallway light washed his face pale, but his hands stayed steady. He didn't glance at her in the usual way, yet he angled his body slightly to give her space, like he was apologizing for sharing the same air. Ava wondered how many times he had practiced being harmless. She walked toward the stairwell and saw the red paper on her door for the first time. It had been taped too high, like whoever placed it wanted it visible from down the corridor. Final notice, printed in heavy letters, felt less like information and more like judgment. Her cheeks burned, even though no one else was watching. She ripped it down, then froze, and smoothed it flat with trembling fingers, as if keeping it intact might keep her life intact. When she turned around, Noah stood behind her, still and quiet, staring at the floor tiles. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't offer the kind of comfort people give when they want credit for being kind. He spoke softly, eyes fixed on the carpet pattern. "That paper is loud," he said, like the notice had a sound only he could hear. Ava let out a short laugh that came out bitter and surprised her. "Everything is loud lately," she whispered. Noah nodded once, too quick, as if agreement cost him something, and his fingers curled inward. Then he added, "Some loud things are meant to scare." Ava wanted to say she was fine. She wanted to perform strength the way she always did, the way single mothers learn to do in grocery lines and school offices. But something in Noah's tone made pretending feel pointless. It wasn't pity. It was certainty. She swallowed and said, "I can't lose this place." She didn't say what she really meant. She couldn't lose her son's belief that home could last. Noah's jaw tightened, and his gaze flicked toward the stairwell, like he had heard an echo that hadn't happened yet. Later, after she put her son to bed, Ava washed dishes that were already clean. The water ran hot, then cold, then hot again, changing its mind like everything else in her life. She kept replaying Noah's words, meant to scare, because they turned her problem from personal failure into something colder and more deliberate. That shift frightened her more than the letter. If fear was the goal, then paying rent might not end it. She dried her hands and stared at the deadbolt, suddenly unsure who it was really meant to protect. Around 9, footsteps approached in the hallway. Ava froze, listening. The steps were slow and unhurried, heavy in a way that suggested confidence, not caution. They stopped in front of her door. A pause followed, long enough for her heart to choose panic. Then came a knock that sounded polite but felt wrong, like a smile that didn't reach the eyes. Ava moved closer, holding her breath, and through the peephole she saw 2 men in pressed jackets and practiced expressions, standing like the silence belonged to them. When Ava cracked the door open, one man said her name, as if they knew each other, as if a relationship existed that she had never agreed to. "We're with management," he said, voice smooth, eyes sliding past her shoulder into her apartment. The other man kept his smile fixed, the kind that didn't need adjustment because it wasn't real. Ava felt her spine straighten, not from courage, but from instinct. In the corner of her vision, she saw Noah's door open a few inches, just enough for a sliver of him to appear, and she realized he had been listening, as if he had known the knock was coming. "There are changes ahead," the first man said, still gentle, still steady. "We're helping residents transition." He spoke the word transition like it was mercy. Ava's mouth went dry. The second man glanced toward Noah and made a small sound of amusement, disrespect disguised as a joke. Noah didn't look up, but his shoulders tightened, and Ava felt a sudden urge to step between them. The first man's eyes returned to Ava, and he said, "We should talk about your situation," as if the decision was already made, and she just hadn't accepted it yet. Ava forced herself to nod so they would keep talking, because silence felt like a trap. Her mind sprinted through images she hated, cardboard boxes, trash bags in a back seat, her son asking questions she couldn't answer. The men's voices stayed pleasant, almost tender, and that sweetness made her skin crawl. Before she could respond, Noah's voice entered the hallway, quiet but unmistakable. "They don't mean help." The words were not loud, yet they landed like glass hitting tile. The 2 men paused for a single beat, then smiled again, and that tiny pause told Ava more than any threat ever could. If you were standing in that hallway, would you trust Noah's warning, or would you worry his involvement could make things worse? Write your answer in the comments below. Ava barely slept. She lay on top of the blankets, fully dressed, listening to the building breathe, pipes ticking, distant TVs murmuring, a door closing somewhere like a final word. Her mind replayed the men's polite voices until the politeness sounded like a threat all by itself. At dawn, she checked on her son and watched his chest rise and fall, steady and innocent, and she felt the old maternal math begin again. What she could sacrifice, what she could endure, what she could never allow. When she stepped into the hallway, Noah's door was already cracked open, as if he had been awake for hours. In the dim light, he looked smaller than she remembered, not weak, just compressed, like someone trying to take up as little space as possible. He held a folded piece of paper in his hand, edges perfectly aligned, and he didn't offer it right away. He waited until Ava's breathing slowed, like he was measuring the moment she could handle one more thing. "They will come back," he said, eyes on the carpet pattern. "When they come back, they will sound nicer." Ava felt a chill crawl up her arms because she understood what he meant. The softer the voice, the sharper the intent. Ava took her son to school and forced a smile through the drop-off line. Other parents chatted about weekend plans, new shoes, harmless problems. She nodded at the right moments, while her brain scanned for danger, like it was a second job. When she turned to leave, she noticed a woman near the office window watching her too closely, holding a clipboard as if it were an extension of her body. The woman's expression didn't match the cheerful posters behind her. Ava's throat tightened, and she walked faster, pretending she hadn't seen the attention latch onto her. Back home, a new notice waited in her mailbox, thin, official, and strangely clean, as if it had been handled with gloves. It wasn't about rent this time. It mentioned community standards, resident conduct, and a scheduled unit review. The words were polite, but they carried the same message. Someone was looking for a reason. Ava read it twice, then a third time, because her mind kept snagging on one line that felt deliberately vague. She glanced around the lobby and suddenly felt exposed, like the building itself had eyes. In the laundry room, two neighbors stopped talking the moment Ava walked in. One of them, a man who used to hold doors for her, stared at the washing machines as if they were fascinating. The other gave a tight smile that felt like a door closing. Ava's cheeks heated. She hadn't done anything, yet she felt accused. She loaded her clothes with hands that didn't feel like her own, and she realized how easily people could be trained to avoid someone, how quickly a community could be turned into an audience. When she returned to her floor, she saw a paper taped to the bulletin board near the elevators. It was a complaint form, copied and posted like a warning label. "Excessive noise," it said. "Possible domestic disturbance." At the bottom, a unit number was written in thick ink. Noah's. Ava's stomach dropped so fast it felt like falling. Noah, who spoke softly, who flinched at loud laughter, who arranged his life around quiet. The accusation made no sense, which somehow made it more terrifying. She knocked on his door before she could talk herself out of it. The door opened slowly, and Noah stood there with his shoulders raised as if bracing for impact. Ava didn't know how to say what she came to say without sounding like she was bringing him poison. "There's something downstairs," she managed. Noah's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in focus, and he exhaled through his nose like someone trying to steady their nervous system. "They used my name," he said, as if confirming a pattern he already knew. Inside his apartment, the air smelled faintly of soap and something metallic, like coins. Everything was arranged with strict care. Shoes lined up, labels on storage bins, a calendar with square boxes filled in with neat handwriting. Ava felt a strange comfort in the order, like it was proof that someone could still control something. Noah stood near the door, not offering a seat, not being rude, just needing distance. "I don't make noise," he said, voice flat, like a fact that should protect him. Ava nodded, the kind of nod that carried helplessness. Ava wanted to rage, to storm into the office and demand an explanation, but she could already imagine the calm faces, the careful words, the way they would make her seem unstable for caring too much. That was the trap. If she stayed quiet, they could write whatever story they wanted. If she spoke up, they could call her difficult. She looked at Noah and saw a different trap around him, one built from stereotypes people treated like truth. He swallowed hard, and his gaze flicked toward a drawer in the hallway console, as if his mind had moved there ahead of his body. Noah walked to that drawer with a stiffness that made Ava think of someone approaching a memory they hated. He didn't open it right away. His fingers hovered, then pulled back, then hovered again, like the choice itself had weight. "When people lie," he said carefully, "they count on others feeling embarrassed to correct them." Ava's eyes stung because the sentence felt aimed at both of them. He finally slid the drawer open a few inches, just enough for her to see the corner of a small device inside. Then he shut it again, as if the object was dangerous. Ava's pulse quickened. "What is that?" she asked, softer than she intended. Noah didn't answer immediately. He stared at the closed drawer, breathing in measured steps, like he was walking his nervous system back from a ledge. "It's how I remember," he said at last. "It's how I stay safe." Ava felt the room tilt with the realization that Noah had been preparing for this longer than she had known him. And before she could ask anything else, there was a sharp knock. 1, 2, 3, on Noah's door, and a cheerful voice on the other side said, "Hello, quick check-in," as if nothing in the world could possibly be wrong. Noah didn't move right away. He stood with his back half-turned, shoulders held too high, listening as if the voice outside had a shape he needed to measure. Ava's hands went cold. The knock sounded friendly, but friendly had started to feel like camouflage. "Hello," the voice repeated, brighter this time. "Just a quick check-in from management." Ava could almost picture the smile, perfectly practiced, like a sign hung in a window. Noah's fingers flexed once, then he stepped to the door with careful control, as if rushing would make something worse. When he opened it, a woman stood there with a clipboard, hair pulled tight, eyes moving fast. She didn't look at Ava first. She looked past Noah, scanning the room like she was counting objects, counting risks. "Hi, Noah," she said, too casual for someone who barely knew him. "We've had a few concerns." Her tone stayed light, as if concerns were small and harmless. Noah's gaze dropped to the floor, and Ava saw his throat bob as he swallowed. "I don't have parties," he said, voice even, but his jaw trembled at the hinge of each word. The woman's smile didn't change. "It's not about parties," she replied. "It's about noise and reports." She tapped her clipboard, and the tapping felt like a tiny hammer. Ava watched Noah's hands hover near his sides, unsure what to do with themselves. She recognized the feeling in her own chest, when someone speaks in vague terms so you can't defend yourself. The woman leaned forward slightly, peering around Noah again, and Ava felt a flare of anger so sharp it surprised her. The woman's eyes finally landed on Ava, and the smile tightened as if Ava had stepped into a place she wasn't supposed to be. "A friend?" the woman asked sweetly. It didn't sound like curiosity. It sounded like a file being labeled. Ava nodded, forcing her face into calm. "We're neighbors," she said. Noah didn't correct her, but his shoulders shifted, a small movement that looked like relief and fear at the same time. The woman scribbled something. "All right," she said, still gentle. "We'll schedule a unit review. Standard process." She said standard the way people say inevitable. Then her eyes flicked toward Noah's hallway console, to the drawer he had almost opened, and something in her expression sharpened. After she left, the hallway quiet returned too quickly, like the building was pretending nothing happened. Noah closed the door with careful pressure, not a slam, not even a firm click. Ava realized he was trying to keep the sound from echoing, like he was apologizing to the walls. He stood still, breathing shallowly, and then he said, "She looked at the drawer." His voice was flat, but the words carried panic underneath, like a steady surface over deep water. Ava stared at the drawer, as if it could betray them by existing. "What's in there?" Ava asked again, and this time she didn't soften it, not because she wanted to corner him, but because she needed something solid. Noah walked to the console and rested his fingertips on the wood, grounding himself. "If I say it," he murmured, "it becomes real." Ava felt that sentence in her own bones. She had spent years not naming her fears, because naming them made them heavier. But the notice on the board, the clipboard, the watching eyes, those were already real, whether she spoke them or not. Noah opened the drawer all the way. Inside was a small audio recorder and a notebook with dates written in precise columns. Ava's first reaction was discomfort, the instinct people have when they realize someone has been preserving reality. Her second reaction was relief so strong it almost made her dizzy. "You record people?" she asked, not accusing, just trying to understand. Noah nodded once. "Important conversations," he said. "When people twist words, they count on memory being weak." He didn't look up, but Ava could hear the history behind the sentence, the times he had been told he misunderstood, the times his truth had been treated like a symptom. Ava picked up the notebook and saw short entries. Dates, times, names, a few clipped phrases, nothing dramatic, just patterns, like breadcrumbs left for a future self who might need proof they weren't imagining things. "Why now?" she asked. Noah's fingers tightened around the recorder. "It's always now," he said quietly. "It just changes faces." Ava's skin prickled. She suddenly wondered how long this had been happening in the building, how many people had been nudged out without anyone noticing, how many stories had been rewritten as their fault. Ava thought of her son and the way school forms asked questions that sounded neutral, but weren't. She imagined a complaint about her instability, a note about her anger, a suggestion that a child might be better somewhere else. Her throat tightened until it hurt. "They can do that," she whispered, more to herself than to Noah. "They can make people believe it." Noah finally looked at her, not directly into her eyes, but close enough that she felt seen. "They try," he said, "but they need you alone for it to work." That night, Ava checked her phone again and again, as if a message could arrive that would solve everything. Instead, a new email appeared from the property office, politely reminding her about resident responsibilities and requesting a meeting to discuss options. The word options sat there like a trap with a ribbon on it. She stared at it until the letters blurred. In the hallway, someone laughed loudly, and her nervous system jumped as if laughter meant danger now. She hated what fear was turning her into. Hyper-aware, suspicious, exhausted. The next morning, a paper bag sat outside Ava's door. It was folded neatly at the top, no logo, no note. Inside were groceries, milk, bread, peanut butter, and a small pack of apples. Ava's eyes stung so suddenly she had to sit on the floor. Kindness felt almost painful when she was this close to losing everything. She knew it was Noah. The careful selection, the quiet delivery, the way it appeared without forcing her to accept it face to face. She held an apple in her palm, feeling its weight, and wondered how someone so targeted could still choose to give. Ava knocked on Noah's door and waited, hearing her own heartbeat in her ears. When he opened it, he stepped back immediately, giving her space without being asked. Ava lifted the bag slightly. "Thank you," she said. Noah's face tightened as if gratitude was a sound he didn't know how to hold. He nodded, then said, "They'll call it charity. They'll say you can't take care of him." Ava's breath caught because he had spoken the fear she hadn't dared to say out loud. He looked down at the bag and added, softer, "They use small things to build big stories." Ava's phone buzzed. Another email notification, this time with an attached document titled Incident Report. Her hands shook as she opened it. The report described a late-night disturbance, raised voices, and possible neglect, dated for a night when Ava had been alone, washing already clean dishes, trying not to cry too loudly in her own kitchen. At the bottom, it listed a witness, a resident on her floor. Ava's stomach dropped as she read the name. It wasn't Noah. It was someone she had once trusted to watch her son for 5 minutes in the hallway. Ava read the witness name again, then again, as if repetition could turn it into a typo. It was Mrs. Klein from Unit 12, the older woman who used to press a peppermint into Ava's palm and say, "You're doing fine, honey," like she meant it. Ava's vision narrowed, not from anger, but from the sudden, sick confusion of betrayal. The report's language was calm and official, the kind that made lies look like facts. She could almost hear how it would sound read aloud by someone who had never met her son, never seen the way he hugged her leg when he got scared. She carried the paper to the kitchen table and stared at it while the coffee maker gurgled behind her. The sound felt obscene, too normal for what was happening. Her brain tried to solve it like a puzzle. Maybe Mrs. Klein had misunderstood. Maybe someone used her name. Maybe she'd been pressured. Then another thought slid in, colder and harder. Maybe kindness had been a costume. Ava hated herself for thinking it. Hated how fear turned everyone into a suspect. She looked at her phone, hovering over Mrs. Klein's number, and her thumb wouldn't press because she didn't know what answer would break her more. At noon, she went downstairs to check the bulletin board again, half hoping the complaint against Noah had vanished like a bad dream. It was still there, crisp and visible, as if someone wanted it to be read. 2 tenants stood nearby pretending to look at flyers. When Ava approached, they drifted away without a word. She felt their avoidance like a shove. Shame rose in her throat, hot and familiar, the old message that told her she was contaminated by her own hardship. She wanted to shout that she paid what she could, that she never missed her son's pickup, that her life was not a cautionary tale. Ava found Mrs. Klein near the mailboxes, clutching a stack of coupons and moving slowly. The woman's mouth tightened when she saw Ava, and Ava knew she had to speak before courage evaporated. "Did you write this?" Ava asked, holding up the incident report. Her voice came out too calm, which frightened her, because calm meant she was close to cracking. Mrs. Klein glanced at the paper and then away, eyes darting like a trapped animal. "I didn't want trouble," she whispered, and that sentence hit Ava harder than a yes. "What did they tell you?" Ava asked, stepping closer. Mrs. Klein's hands shook as she sorted her coupons, pretending she needed to keep busy. They said the building needs good residents," she murmured. "They said if I helped, they'd finally fix my bathtub and stop the rent increase." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She looked ashamed of having tears at all. Ava felt a painful compassion flare, because she could see it clearly now. They weren't just pushing people out. They were buying people's fear, one repair promise at a time. Ava wanted to forgive her, and couldn't. She wanted to condemn her, and couldn't. The moral knot tightened inside her chest, because survival made cowards out of decent people, and decent people still hurt others when cornered. "My son could lose everything," Ava said, voice breaking on son. "Mrs." Klein flinched, as if the word had weight. "I know," she whispered. "That's why I can't be the one they point at." Ava realized Mrs. Klein wasn't choosing evil. She was choosing not to be chosen next. Back upstairs, Ava found Noah in the hallway, holding his mail like it was something fragile. He didn't ask what happened, but his posture changed when he saw her face, like he could read distress better than small talk. Ava showed him the report. Noah's eyes scanned it quickly, then stopped at the witness name. He went very still. "They're building a file," he said. The words were plain, but the fear underneath made Ava's skin prickle. She thought of a file like a wall being built brick by brick, each brick a tiny lie that looked harmless until it blocked all light. Noah opened his notebook on the console and flipped to a page with dates. "She was in the hallway on that night," he said, tapping a line. "But she wasn't near your door." Ava stared. "How do you know?" she asked. Noah hesitated, then answered with careful honesty. "I track sounds," he said. "Steps, doors, patterns." He spoke like someone confessing something that had been mocked before. Ava felt an unexpected gratitude. The very sensitivity people dismissed in Noah might be the thing that protected her now. Noah reached into the drawer and turned the recorder over in his hands without pressing play. "If they're saying things happened," he said, "they'll say them again." Ava understood the unspoken plan. Wait, listen, collect the truth before it got erased. But waiting felt like letting poison spread. "What if they call child services?" she asked, and her voice cracked on services, because the word sounded like a polite kidnapping. Noah's lips parted, then closed, like his brain had to choose the safest way to answer. "That's why they wrote it," he said softly. "To make you panic." Ava's phone rang. An unknown number. Her body reacted before her mind did. Heart racing, palms damp, breath shallow. She let it go to voicemail, because hearing the wrong voice could destroy her fragile control. A minute later, a message appeared as a transcription. "Hello. This is Karen from Resident Relations. We need to speak about a concern involving your child. Please call me back today. Ava's vision blurred. The phrase involving your child felt like hands reaching into her home. She looked at Noah, and for the first time she saw his calm as effort, not ease. That evening, Ava picked up her son from school and studied his face in the rearview mirror. He was humming softly, tapping his fingers on his lunchbox, safe for now. Ava smiled at him and asked about his day, forcing her voice to sound normal. Inside, she was counting threats like beads on a string. When they got home, she noticed something new. A small sticker on her doorframe, clear and easy to miss unless you were looking for it. It wasn't decoration. It looked like a marker, the kind used to tell someone, "This one." Ava touched the sticker with the tip of her finger, barely breathing. Noah stepped into the hallway behind her, gaze fixed on the sticker, and his face drained of color. "They marked you," he whispered. Then, as if the words hurt to say, he added, "And they marked me before." Ava peeled the clear sticker off the doorframe, but the feeling of being chosen didn't peel away with it. The plastic clung to her fingertip like a secret. She held it up to the hallway light and saw a faint symbol printed inside, so subtle it could pass as nothing. Nothing was the point. The mind ignored what it couldn't label, and whoever did this counted on that. Ava's pulse hammered as she imagined someone placing it there calmly, without urgency, like tagging a box in storage. Noah stayed a step behind her, not close enough to crowd, not far enough to abandon. His breathing sounded shallow, controlled, as if each inhale was negotiated. "They do it so the right person knows," he said, eyes fixed on the spot where the sticker had been. Ava wanted to ask who the right person was, but her mouth wouldn't form it. Fear made questions feel dangerous, like speaking them invited answers. Noah's fingers twitched near his pocket, a small repetitive motion, and Ava realized he was regulating himself the way she used to regulate her son during nightmares. Inside her apartment, Ava double-checked the window locks, then hated herself for it. She wasn't afraid of someone breaking in with force. She was afraid of something worse, someone rewriting reality with paperwork, rumors, and concerns, until she couldn't prove her own life. She pictured a calm office where strangers nodded sympathetically while deciding her child's future. Her stomach turned. The brain clung to the most vivid image it could find. And right now, the vivid image was her son being led away by someone who believed a report more than a mother's face. The next day, Ava showed up at the property office because waiting felt like drowning slowly. The lobby smelled like air freshener and fresh paint, a place designed to look clean enough to be trusted. A receptionist smiled too brightly and asked her to take a seat. Ava sat and watched the door to the back offices, counting seconds the way people count rosary beads. When Karen finally appeared, she wore a soft cardigan and a concerned expression, as if she'd been worrying about Ava all night. "Ava," she said, warm like cocoa, "thank you for coming in." Karen offered her water, then didn't wait for Ava to drink it. She slid a folder across the desk with the gentlest touch, like she was delivering bad news to a child. "We've received multiple reports," she said. Multiple. The word was a weapon because it suggested a crowd. Ava's throat tightened. Karen didn't accuse directly, she implied. "Late-night distress," she said. "Noise, a child sounding upset." Ava's chest burned with anger because her son was allowed to cry sometimes, allowed to be human. "He had a bad dream," Ava said, and even as she said it, she heard how small it sounded against a folder. Karen nodded with practiced sympathy. "Of course," she said, "and we understand parenting can be overwhelming." Overwhelming. Ava felt the subtle tilt, not a mother under pressure, but a mother who might break. Karen leaned in slightly, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "There are programs," she said, "temporary support options, housing solutions." Solutions sounded like eviction wearing perfume. Ava pictured signing something in a moment of exhaustion, a signature that would be used against her later. Her palms dampened, and she tucked her hands under her thighs so Karen wouldn't see them shake. Ava forced herself to ask, "Who made the reports?" Karen's smile held. "We can't disclose names," she said smoothly, then added, "But it's for everyone's safety." Safety was another word that ended conversations. Ava felt her heart sprint as her mind tried to fill the blank with faces. Mrs. Klein, the quiet man by the mailboxes, someone from the parking lot. The uncertainty was the torture. The brain hated open loops. It burned energy trying to close them. Karen seemed to know that because she watched Ava's expression as if watching a gauge. Then Karen said something that sounded like kindness, but landed like a threat. "If this escalates," she murmured, "we may have to make a report to child welfare just to ensure the home environment is stable." Ava's body went cold. Stable. The word made Ava think of horses, gates, containment. She wanted to stand up and run, but her legs stayed planted, heavy as guilt. Karen's eyes softened, and that softness felt cruel because it suggested Ava should be grateful for the warning. Ava left the office with the folder pressed to her chest like a wound. In the hallway, she saw a framed photo of the building's Community Day, smiling tenants holding paper plates and balloons. She stared at the photo and wondered how many of those smiles had been used later as evidence of compliance. Outside, the sun was bright, but she couldn't feel it. Her brain kept replaying child welfare as if repetition could build immunity. Instead, it built dread. By the time she reached her floor, her hands were shaking so hard she could barely fit her key into the lock. Noah's door opened almost immediately, as if he had been waiting for the sound of her footsteps. Ava didn't speak at first. She stepped into his apartment because her own walls suddenly felt unsafe, and she sat on the edge of his couch with her elbows on her knees. Noah stood nearby, giving her distance but not absence. When she finally told him what Karen said, Noah's face tightened, and his gaze dropped to the recorder drawer like a compass pointing toward north. "They want you to sign something," he said quietly. "Or to react. Either way, they win." Ava looked up. "How do you know?" she asked, and her voice carried a plea she hated. Noah swallowed, and for a moment he looked like someone choosing between pain and truth. "Because they tried it with me," he said. His words came out slower now. They didn't say child welfare. They said wellness checks, capacity, concerns. He paused, and Ava felt the weight of the unspoken years in that pause. "They used my diagnosis like a stamp," he added, voice barely above a whisper. "They said I couldn't be trusted to describe what happened." Ava's chest tightened with a new kind of fear, one that felt like shame on someone else's behalf. She remembered the smirk from the man in the hallway, the way people looked at Noah like he was an easy story to sell. Noah didn't look angry. He looked tired, like someone who had learned to live inside other people's assumptions. "What did you do?" Ava asked. Noah's fingers curled into his palm, then released. "I started keeping everything," he said. "So when they said I was confused, I could show time, dates, words, their words." He pulled the notebook out and opened it to a page marked with a tiny red tab. Ava expected chaos. Instead, she saw order, timestamps, brief summaries, names when he had them, descriptions of voices and phrases. It was like reading a map someone drew while lost. Noah tapped one line with his fingertip. "That man," he said. "The one who knocked on your door. He was here before. Different month, different reason, same voice." Ava's skin prickled. She leaned in closer, and Noah hesitated, then slid the notebook toward her. On the page, one entry stood out because it wasn't just notes. It was a sentence Noah had underlined twice. "If we can't move him, we make him look unsafe." Ava stared at the words until they felt like they were moving. Make him look unsafe. That was the plan. Not a fight, not a crime, a story. Ava's mouth went dry. She realized they weren't just targeting her and Noah separately. They were testing which story would stick first, And if one story stuck, it would make the other easier. A soft chime sounded from Noah's phone on the counter, a new email notification. Noah glanced at the screen and went still, like his nervous system had recognized danger before his mind could translate it. He didn't pick up the phone right away. His fingers hovered, then pulled back. Ava watched his face drain, and her own heart began to race in response, mirroring him without permission. Finally he spoke, voice thin. "They scheduled the unit review," he said, "for tomorrow morning." Then he added, almost as an afterthought that made Ava's stomach drop, "And they want you there too." Ava tried to sleep, but her mind kept opening the same door and walking through it. Tomorrow morning. Unit review. Her brain played scenes that hadn't happened yet because uncertainty felt unbearable, and imagination offered a false sense of preparation. She pictured strangers stepping over Noah's threshold with polite smiles, scanning for anything that could be turned into a sentence in a folder. She pictured her own presence being framed as suspicious, like she had something to hide. At 2 a.m, she stood at her kitchen sink and watched water run over her hands, trying to convince her body it was safe. It didn't believe her. When the sun came up, she made her son breakfast and forced her voice into normal. Cereal, a banana, a joke she'd told before. Her son giggled anyway, trusting her as if she were unbreakable. The trust hurt. It was a warm weight on her chest. She walked him to school, kissed his forehead longer than usual, and then sat in her car for a full minute, staring at the steering wheel like it held answers. A thought flashed through her mind. Call in sick to life, disappear, run. And then she felt disgusted with herself because running would only teach her son that fear could evict you without notice. Ava arrived at Noah's door 10 minutes early. The hallway smelled like lemon cleaner, too strong, as if someone had tried to erase ordinary human living from the air. Noah opened the door immediately, dressed neatly, hair combed, eyes tired. He looked like someone preparing to be judged, not visited. On his coffee table sat a stack of papers, lined up with ruler-straight edges, and beside them, the small recorder. Ava's throat tightened at the sight. Preparation didn't mean paranoia when the world kept proving you right. "They'll look for disorder," Noah said quietly, as if he could read her thoughts. "If they find none, they'll invent a different kind." Ava stepped inside and noticed how intensely clean everything was, but not sterile. The place felt cared for in a deeply personal way, like order was Noah's version of prayer. A bowl of keys sat perfectly centered on a side table. Shoes faced the same direction, like they were waiting for instructions. Even the throw blanket was folded into a rectangle. Ava wondered how many nights Noah had done this, folding and refolding, because the alternative was feeling at the mercy of other people's chaos. She wanted to tell him he didn't have to be perfect to deserve safety, but she knew the world rarely agreed. At 9 sharp, there was a knock. Not hard, not soft, measured. The kind that pretended to respect boundaries while testing them. Noah's shoulders rose and his fingers hovered near the recorder, as if touch alone could steady him. Ava moved closer to the doorway, not to confront, but to witness, because being witnessed was sometimes the only shield people had. Noah opened the door, and the same clipboard woman stood there with a man in a pressed jacket, both wearing the calm faces of people who believed paperwork made them moral. "Good morning," the man said, voice warm, eyes cold. "Just a quick walkthrough." He didn't ask permission so much as announce a conclusion. The woman smiled and stepped in first, already scanning corners. The man's gaze settled on Ava. "And you are?" he asked, polite as a blade. Ava lifted her chin. "A neighbor," she said, and she hated how the word neighbor sounded like an excuse in his mouth. The man's smile widened a fraction. "Of course," he said, as if that explained everything he wanted to believe. They moved through Noah's living room slowly, looking at nothing and everything at once. The woman opened closet doors with the careful confidence of someone searching for a specific mistake. The man asked questions that sounded casual but weren't. "Do you have visitors often?" he asked Noah. Noah swallowed. "No," he said. "It's too much." The man nodded like he was listening, then wrote something down anyway. Ava watched the pen strokes and felt rage rise, because she knew the truth could be distorted with a single adjective. Too much could become unstable. Quiet could become withdrawn. Different could become dangerous. The woman paused at Noah's kitchen counter where a small row of medication bottles sat neatly aligned, labels facing outward. Noah stiffened. Ava saw his eyes fix on the bottles, not because he was ashamed, but because he knew what they could represent in the wrong hands. The woman didn't touch them, but she looked long enough to make the moment feel like an accusation. "Do you take these regularly?" she asked, voice bright. Noah answered carefully. "Yes, as prescribed." Ava felt her own heart pounding, because the question wasn't about health. It was about narrative. What story could they tell about him if they chose to? The man walked toward the hallway console and stopped in front of the drawer. Ava's stomach clenched. He didn't know what was inside, but he recognized the human instinct to hide important things. He rested 2 fingers on the drawer knob with false casualness. "Mind if we open this?" he asked. It was phrased as a request, but it felt like a test. Noah's breathing changed, shorter, faster, yet his voice stayed controlled. "I do mind," he said. The man smiled, then softened his tone, as if soothing a child. "We're just ensuring everything is safe." Ava stepped forward before she fully decided to. "What exactly are you looking for?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but inside she felt like glass under pressure. The man turned toward her, smile intact. "We're looking for compliance," he said gently, like compliance was a kindness people offered. Ava felt the word wrap around her throat. Compliance meant surrender dressed as cooperation. The woman scribbled again, and Ava could almost hear the sentence forming. Resident became agitated. Neighbor interfered. Pattern of hostility. Noah's hand went to the drawer, not opening it, just resting on it like a promise. "I keep personal items," he said. "Private." The man's eyes narrowed slightly, then widened again into friendliness. "Of course," he repeated, and Ava realized friendliness was his weapon of choice. He leaned closer to Noah, lowering his voice, making it sound intimate. "We've had concerns," he murmured, "about your ability to accurately interpret events." The words were soft, but they struck like a punch. Ava saw Noah flinch, just a fraction, and she understood. This wasn't about a drawer. It was about undermining Noah's credibility before he even spoke. Noah didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small recorder, placing it on the console in full view. The gesture was calm, almost gentle, but it changed the air. The man's smile twitched. The woman's pen paused mid-stroke. Noah looked down at the device, not at them, and said, "I record important interactions to help my memory." He spoke like someone stating a fact, not making a threat. Ava felt a spark of hope, sharp and dangerous. If truth existed in a device, it could survive their storytelling. The man's voice stayed warm, but a new edge appeared beneath it. "That may not be appropriate," he said. Noah's fingers hovered over the recorder, not pressing anything, just showing he could. "It is for me," Noah replied. Ava watched the man's eyes flick, calculating. Then he said, "We'll note this," and the woman started writing again, faster now. Ava realized they were adapting, looking for a new angle, a new label. The man glanced around the room once more and then said, as if casually concluding, "We'll also be scheduling a wellness evaluation, just to be sure." Ava felt her stomach drop. Wellness evaluation. It sounded polite, even caring, but she heard what it meant. A door opening for strangers to decide whether Noah belonged. Noah's face went very still, like his emotions had locked behind a wall. He nodded once, too fast, and Ava saw the effort it took not to collapse in front of them. The man smiled, satisfied, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, he paused and looked back at Ava. "And we'll need to speak with you again," he said, "about your situation." Then he added, almost kindly, "It's best when everyone cooperates." After they left, the hallway felt too quiet, like the building was listening. Noah stood by the console, staring at the recorder, not touching it. Ava waited, afraid to speak, because words might shatter him. Finally, Noah exhaled, a long, slow breath that sounded like someone letting go of a cliff edge. "They think I won't fight," he said, voice low. Ava swallowed. "Will you?" she asked. Noah's eyes flicked to the drawer, then to the door, then back to the recorder. "Not like they expect," he whispered. And with that, he opened the drawer and pulled out a second device Ava hadn't seen before, wrapped in a cloth like something precious, and said, "I kept the one that matters." Ava stared at the second device in Noah's hands, smaller than the first, older, edges worn smooth from use. He held it as if it carried more than sound, as if it carried a past he didn't like revisiting. The cloth around it was folded with the same careful precision as everything else, but his fingers trembled, betraying the effort. Ava didn't reach for it. She waited, letting him control the pace, because she could feel how easily he could shut down if pushed. "That one," Noah said quietly, "doesn't just record. It remembers clearly." He sat at the coffee table and placed the device down between them like a fragile truth. For a moment he simply breathed, eyes fixed on the tabletop grain, counting something inside his head. Ava noticed a faint scar near his thumb, pale against his skin. She wondered what it had cost him to start documenting his life this way. "People think memory is like a video," he said, voice flat but intimate. "It isn't. It changes when you're scared." Ava felt the words land in her own body. Fear had been editing her thoughts for weeks, cutting out calm, amplifying dread. Noah pressed a button. The device beeped softly. He played a clip that began with hallway noise, footsteps, a door hinge, someone clearing their throat. Then a man's voice slid in, low and confident, not the friendly tone they used in daylight. "If she doesn't go," the voice said, "we'll make her go. The single mom. Easy. She'll fold." Ava's skin went cold. The voice continued, as if discussing weather. "And the autistic guy? We can label him unsafe. That's faster." Ava's mouth went dry, because hearing it out loud made the cruelty feel ordinary, and ordinary cruelty was the most terrifying kind. Ava covered her mouth with her hand, trying to keep her breathing quiet, as if the device could hear her panic and record that too. Noah stopped the audio quickly, like he couldn't tolerate more than a few seconds at a time. His eyes stayed down. "I kept it," he murmured, "because I knew someday someone would need to hear it." Ava's mind raced. If this existed, it could protect them. But if anyone found out, it could also paint a target. Truth wasn't always a shield. Sometimes it was a flare. "Why didn't you use it before?" Ava asked, and her voice sounded like a confession of fear. Noah's jaw tightened. "Because they make you doubt yourself first," he said. "They make you ask if you're overreacting." He glanced up briefly, not meeting her eyes, but close enough to feel like a hand on her shoulder. "And because when you show your evidence too early," he added, "they learn what you have. Then they change their tactics." Ava felt a strange shiver. It wasn't just paranoia. It was strategy. Noah had been surviving a silent war of stories. Ava thought of Karen's cardigan, the gentle voice, the folder. She thought of Mrs. Klein's trembling hands and the promise of a fixed bathtub. She thought of the sticker on her doorframe, a mark that said she was a problem to be managed. Her stomach turned as she realized how many people had participated without ever feeling like villains. "So what now?" she asked. The question sounded simple, but it held everything. Her son, her home, her dignity. Noah stared at the device and said, "Now we don't let them keep it private." The phrase startled her. Ava had expected him to say report it, file a complaint, go to the office. But he wasn't thinking in their system. He was thinking outside the frame they controlled. "They rely on closed doors," Noah continued, "on private meetings, on your fear being invisible." He took a slow breath, then reached for his phone and opened a notes app filled with carefully typed names and contacts. Ava saw one line that made her pulse jump. A tenant rights nonprofit number, saved under a neutral label. Another line. A local reporter's email, saved without a name, just initials. Ava's first instinct was to pull back. Media meant exposure. Exposure meant judgment. Judgment meant people who didn't know her deciding who she was. She imagined comments, headlines, strangers dissecting her parenting from a distance. The thought made her stomach lurch. Noah seemed to sense it, because he didn't rush. "It doesn't have to be your face," he said softly. "It can be their words." Ava swallowed. She pictured her son's classmates' parents reading a story about a troubled mother and deciding her child was troubled too. The shame threatened to drown her. That afternoon, Ava picked up her son and tried to act normal while her mind spun. In the car, her son told her about a spelling quiz and a kid who traded him a cookie for an eraser. Ava laughed at the right moments, but her hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly. She kept thinking about how children lived inside the stories adults told about them. If her story became unstable, her son would carry that shadow. At a red light, Ava glanced at her rearview mirror and saw a white sedan behind her that had been there for several turns. The driver's face was hidden behind glare. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself she was exhausted. But her nervous system didn't accept reassurance. She took a different route home, then another, and the white sedan stayed behind her like an echo. When she finally pulled into the lot, the sedan rolled past slowly and didn't park. Ava's mouth went dry. She carried her son inside, heart pounding, and kept her smile in place like a mask. At her door, she fumbled for her keys, hands suddenly clumsy. She felt watched, even in the silence. That night, Ava heard voices in the hallway again. Two men, low and close, stopping near her door as if it were a landmark. She didn't open it. She didn't breathe loudly. She stood in the dark living room holding her phone, staring at the door lock, listening to words she couldn't fully catch. Then she heard something that made her blood turn to ice. "Tomorrow," one of them said, "we file the next report, the one that forces her hand." Ava pressed her knuckles to her lips to keep from making a sound. Force her hand meant make her choose between surrender and disaster. Across the hall, Noah's door opened quietly. Ava couldn't see him, but she heard the soft click and then his footsteps, precise, controlled, moving into the hallway as if he had decided something. The men's voices stopped for a beat, like predators noticing a new variable. Noah didn't speak loudly. He spoke just enough. "I heard you," he said. A pause followed, thick, heavy. Then one of the men gave a short laugh, the same laugh Ava remembered from before. "Sure you did," the man replied. "You people always think you hear things." Noah's voice didn't change. "I don't think," he said. "I record." The silence that followed felt like a room holding its breath. Ava's heart slammed against her ribs. She imagined the men's faces, the quick recalculations, the sudden risk of losing control of the story. Then she heard the men step closer to Noah's door, not fast, just deliberate. Ava's fingers hovered over her phone screen, unsure whether calling for help would help or hurt. And then Noah spoke again, softer this time, almost to himself. "It's already sent." Ava opened her door a crack, not enough to be seen, just enough to hear. The hallway light poured in like an accusation. The two men stood close to Noah's door, bodies angled to block the view from the stairwell. their posture relaxed in a way that felt rehearsed. Noah stood in front of them with his shoulders squared, gaze lowered, hands visible at his sides, as if he knew anything sudden could be framed as aggression. Ava's pulse thudded in her ears. She expected shouting. Instead, the air filled with quiet voices, the kind that made you lean in, the kind that made you doubt your own hearing. "What did you send?" one man asked, friendly as always, like he was chatting with a neighbor about a package. Noah didn't answer right away. He looked at the carpet seam as if it anchored him. "A copy," he said finally, "of your words." The second man chuckled, a short sound meant to shame. "You can't record people," he said. "That's not how this works." Noah's voice stayed flat. "It is how my life works," he replied, and Ava felt a strange surge of pride, because Noah wasn't asking permission to protect himself anymore. The first man's smile tightened. "Noah, you're confused," he said gently, with the same tone Karen used when she implied Ava was overwhelmed. "You misinterpret things." Ava's stomach twisted at the familiar trick. If they could make Noah doubt his perception, they could make everything disappear. Noah didn't argue. He simply repeated, "It's already sent." The words were quiet, but they changed the men's breathing. Ava could hear it, the smallest shift from control to calculation. The brain hated losing leverage, and for the first time, they didn't have it. The men stepped back half a pace, not retreating, repositioning. "Who did you send it to?" the second man asked, still casual, eyes sharper now. Noah's face remained calm in a way that looked learned, not natural, like he had practiced staying level while being provoked. "Not one person," he said. "More than one." Ava's heart lifted and sank at the same time. More than one meant safer. More than one also meant bigger. Once something left the building, it could become a story that didn't belong to any of them anymore. The first man nodded slowly as if he understood, as if this was a reasonable conversation between adults. "All right," he said. "We can clear this up tomorrow." He said tomorrow, like a promise. Then he leaned closer, lowering his voice to something almost tender. "Just don't do anything that could cause trouble," he murmured. Ava felt the threat inside the softness. Trouble meant consequences that wouldn't be written down. Noah didn't flinch. He stood still, and his stillness looked like courage made from habit. The men finally walked away down the hall, shoes quiet, confidence returning in small increments with every step. Ava watched them go through the crack in her door until they turned the corner and vanished. Only then did she realize she'd been holding her breath. She let it out slowly, body trembling, and stepped into the hallway. Noah didn't look at her at first. He stared at his door handle like it was the only stable thing in the world. Ava whispered, "Are you okay?" Noah blinked, once, twice, like he was waking from a bright, harsh dream. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He opened his door and stepped inside, and Ava followed without asking, because permission felt unnecessary now. The apartment looked the same as before, but the air felt different, charged, thinner, like a storm was close. Noah walked straight to the coffee table and picked up his phone. Ava saw his screen, an email thread with attachments, timestamps, and short subject lines that sounded harmless to anyone else. He scrolled with a steadiness that didn't match the tension in his jaw. "Tenant rights," he said quietly. "And a reporter." Ava's throat tightened. A reporter made it real in a new way. Ava's mind flashed to her son, to school pickup, to gossip traveling faster than truth. She imagined someone recognizing her name, her building, her face. The thought made her chest constrict. "Will they use my child?" she asked, and her voice cracked on child like the word was breakable. Noah paused. He chose his next words carefully, like stepping around glass. "They already are," he said. "That's why it can't stay here." Ava felt nausea and clarity at once. Keeping quiet hadn't protected her. it had only protected the people who wanted her afraid. The next morning, Ava's phone rang while she was buttering toast. A number she didn't recognize, but the area code was local. She let it go to voicemail, hands shaking, then listened to the message with her heart in her throat. A woman's voice, calm and professional. "Hi, this is Marissa from Central Ohio Tenant Advocacy. We received materials last night. We'd like to meet today. Please call back as soon as you can." Ava sank into a chair. Her first feeling was relief. Her second was dread. Meet today meant the story was moving, and once a story moved, you couldn't control where it went. By afternoon, Ava sat in a small office with beige walls and a coffee machine that smelled burnt. Marissa shook her hand with a grip that felt steady, real. No sugary sympathy, no hidden contempt, just focus. Noah sat beside Ava, posture rigid, eyes on the table, hands clasped, regulating himself through stillness. Marissa asked simple questions and took careful notes. She didn't push Noah to perform emotion. She didn't rush his pauses. Ava watched Noah's shoulders drop a fraction, as if being treated like a reliable human was a form of medicine. Marissa played a short portion of the recording, then stopped, face tightening. "This is serious," she said. Ava felt her chest warm with a hope she didn't fully trust. Hope could be another trap. Marissa explained that patterns like this often came with pressure tactics, forced voluntary moves, and reputational smears designed to isolate tenants. She said it in plain language, but every sentence landed hard. Ava realized she wasn't uniquely failing. She was being methodically squeezed. That recognition didn't solve the problem, but it unclenched something inside her. The shame began to loosen. Marissa leaned forward. "We can help you respond," she said, "but you need to prepare for escalation. They won't like losing control." Ava's stomach dropped again. Escalation didn't have to mean violence to be terrifying. It could mean more reports, more whispers, more people turning away in hallways. It could mean a knock on the door from someone wearing a badge and holding a clipboard. Ava pictured her son's face at the door, confused, and she fought the urge to run back to him immediately. When the meeting ended, Marissa walked them out and handed Ava a small card with a direct number. "Call me the moment anything changes," she said. Outside, the sky had that flat winter light that made everything look honest and bleak. Noah stood beside Ava, looking down, hands in his pockets, breathing measured. Ava wanted to thank him, but gratitude still felt too small for what he had done. As they crossed the parking lot, a black SUV sat near the curb with its engine running. Ava's skin prickled. The vehicle didn't belong there in the way a stranger's stare didn't belong. Ava and Noah kept walking, neither of them speaking. The SUV's headlights stayed on, bright even in daylight, and the driver didn't step out. Ava felt her pulse climb, that old survival signal screaming for meaning. She glanced at Noah. He didn't look at the SUV directly, but his jaw tightened and his pace slowed by half a beat. "They're watching," Ava whispered. Noah's voice came out barely audible. "They want you to feel watched," he corrected. Then he added, as if finishing a thought that had started long ago, "Because the next part only works when you're tired." That evening, a new email hit Ava's inbox from the property office, subject line cheerful. "Good news about your lease." Her stomach turned before she even opened it. Inside was an offer, reduced rent for 3 months, a fresh start, and a request to sign by the next day. It looked like help. It read like mercy. But at the bottom, buried in polite language, was a clause about voluntary relocation and waiving claims. Ava's hands shook. The trap had changed shape, and the timing felt too perfect to be coincidence. Ava stared at the good news email until the words stopped looking like words and started looking like a magician's scarf, bright, flowing, meant to distract from the hand doing the trick. Reduced rent, fresh start, voluntary relocation, waiving claims. Her brain tried to grab onto the first two phrases because they promised relief, and relief was addictive when you were exhausted. Then her mind snapped back to the last phrase, the hidden blade in the velvet. Waiving claims meant forgiving harm that hadn't finished happening yet. She forwarded the email to Marissa and sat on the edge of her couch with her phone in both hands, elbows tight to her ribs, body bracing as if impact were physical. Across the hall, Noah's door opened softly. He didn't knock. He stood in the doorway and waited for Ava to notice, giving her control of the interaction the way he always did. Ava waved him in, and he stepped inside with careful, quiet movements. She showed him the email. Noah read it twice, eyes tracking each line with a precision that made Ava think of someone reading for survival. "It's a confession," Noah said finally. Ava blinked. "How?" she asked. Noah pointed to the clause about waiving claims. "If they did nothing wrong," he said, "they wouldn't need you to give up your right to say they did." Ava felt a sharp jolt of clarity, the kind that made her almost dizzy. He was right. The offer wasn't kindness, it was containment. Her body wanted to accept it anyway because the nervous system preferred a bad certainty over endless threat. She hated that about herself. She hated how fear could make surrender feel like peace. Marissa called within the hour. "Do not sign," she said, voice firm. "This is designed to cut off accountability." Ava held the phone to her ear and watched her son at the kitchen table, coloring a spaceship with intense focus, tongue slightly out in concentration. She wanted to protect him from every adult game being played around them. Marissa continued, "We're requesting a meeting with their corporate office. If they refuse, we go wider." Go wider. Ava's stomach tightened. Wider meant attention. Attention meant judgment. But it also meant light, and light made it harder for quiet sabotage to breathe. The meeting was scheduled for the next afternoon in a glassy office downtown that smelled like polished wood and expensive calm. Ava arrived early with Noah and Marissa. The lobby had soft music and a wall of framed awards, as if success itself were proof of virtue. Ava felt her clothes suddenly too plain, her shoes too worn, like she had walked into a place that expected people to apologize for needing help. Noah stood slightly behind her shoulder, gaze down, hands clasped, his posture composed, but strained. Marissa walked beside them with the steady pace of someone who refused to be impressed by architecture. They were led into a conference room where two executives waited with smiles that looked professionally rehearsed. Karen was there too, sitting a little to the side, hands folded, expression gentle as ever. A man in a tailored suit introduced himself and spoke in smooth, reassuring phrases. "We care deeply about resident well-being," he said. Ava heard the words and felt something in her chest harden. Care was easy to say when it cost nothing. Marissa slid a folder across the table. "We're here about coercive practices," she said plainly, and the room's warmth cooled by a few degrees. The executive's smile didn't vanish, but it thinned. He glanced at the folder as if it were slightly dirty. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding," he said. Misunderstanding was their favorite word because it made harm sound accidental. Marissa didn't react. She opened the folder and placed printed transcripts of the audio on the table, lines highlighted in yellow. Ava watched the executive's eyes flick over the page, and for the first time his expression hesitated, like his brain had hit something it couldn't charm away. Noah kept his gaze down, but his breathing changed. Short, controlled, the effort visible in his throat. Ava felt an urge to put her hand on his arm, but she didn't, because she sensed he was holding himself together by managing sensation and proximity. Karen spoke softly, as if soothing. "We have to take complaints seriously," she said. Ava nearly laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly upside down. They were taking lies seriously and treating truth like inconvenience. Marissa's voice stayed calm. "Then you'll take these words seriously too," she replied, tapping the highlighted transcript. The executive leaned back and steepled his fingers, posture shifting into authority. "Recordings can be misleading," he said, "especially when made by individuals who may not interpret social context accurately." He didn't say autism. He didn't need to. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Ava's face flushed with anger. Noah's hands tightened together, knuckles whitening, but he didn't interrupt. Marissa's eyes sharpened. "Are you suggesting a disability makes someone unreliable?" she asked. The executive's smile returned, slow. "I'm suggesting," he said, "that we should be cautious." Ava felt her heart pounding so hard she could hear it. She wanted to stand up and scream that Noah was the only person who had consistently told the truth in this whole building. But she knew how quickly emotion could be turned into a label: angry, unstable, difficult. Instead, she did something that surprised even her. She spoke slowly and quietly. "My son is not a bargaining chip," she said. "And I won't sign away my rights because you wrote an email with a smile." The room went still for a second, because quiet defiance didn't fit their script. Noah moved then, small and deliberate. He slid his phone across the table, screen facing the executive. On it was an email chain with timestamps, showing that the audio and documents had been sent to multiple places before this meeting even existed. The executive's eyes narrowed. Karen's lips parted slightly, as if she had just realized the room wasn't sealed. Noah's voice stayed low. "You can't bury it," he said. "It doesn't live only here." Ava felt a surge of awe and fear. Noah hadn't come to argue. He had come to make erasure impossible. The executive's tone shifted, a crack showing through polish. "Who else has this?" he asked. Noah didn't answer with names. He answered with certainty. "Enough," he said. Ava watched the executive's gaze flick to Karen, then back, calculation moving behind his eyes like a machine starting up. Marissa leaned forward. "We're prepared to escalate," she said, "but you can choose a corrective path today." For a moment, the room teetered between two futures, one where Ava and Noah were quietly pushed out, and one where the company had to admit it had been hunting people who couldn't afford lawyers. The executive cleared his throat. "We'll need to consult counsel," he said, and that was when the door opened without a knock. A new man stepped in, older, expensive watch, calm in a way that felt heavier than friendliness. He didn't introduce himself to Ava. He addressed the executive like they were equals. "Turn that off," he said, eyes on Noah's phone, voice flat. Noah didn't move, but his breathing tightened, and Ava felt her stomach drop. This man didn't look surprised. He looked like he had been waiting for this moment. Marissa's posture stiffened. "And you are?" she asked. The man glanced at her briefly, then back to the executive. "Corporate counsel," he said. "Counsel." The word sounded like a gate closing. He looked at Ava for the first time, not with contempt, not with empathy, but with assessment, as if she were a risk to be priced. "We can resolve this," he said, "if everyone behaves rationally." Ava heard the subtext. "Stop making noise. Accept the deal. Disappear neatly." Noah's fingers twitched near the edge of the table, a small sign of rising overload, but his voice stayed controlled. "I already sent it," he repeated. Corporate counsel's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. "Then you should be very careful about what you do next," he said, as if caution itself belonged to him. Ava felt terror flare, not because she expected violence, but because she recognized the kind of power that never had to raise its voice, the kind that could ruin you with a phone call and sleep fine afterward. Marissa stood up slowly, refusing to shrink. "We're leaving," she said, "and we're documenting your response." Counsel smiled faintly, like documentation was a toy. "Do what you need to do," he replied. Outside the building, the winter air hit Ava's lungs like a slap, and she realized she had been breathing shallowly the entire meeting. Noah stood beside her on the sidewalk, gaze fixed on the cracks in the concrete, shoulders tight. Marissa spoke in a low voice. "They're going to move fast," she said. Ava's stomach turned. Fast meant they would try to outpace truth. Ava looked at Noah, searching his face for whether he was breaking, and saw instead a kind of grim calm. He pulled out his phone, opened a draft email, and his thumb hovered over the send button. "What are you doing?" Ava asked, voice thin. Noah didn't look up. "The quiet move," he said. "The one they can't stop." Then he pressed send, and the screen flashed briefly. Message delivered, just as Ava's phone buzzed with a new notification from the property office. Immediate notice, lease review. Ava's hands went numb as she read the words, immediate notice, lease review. The notification felt like a finger tapping her shoulder in a dark room. Not a scream, not a shove. A tap that said, "We can still reach you." She opened the email and saw a time for the next morning, early, framed as an urgent administrative requirement. The language was polite enough to be printed on letterhead, yet it carried the cold certainty of a decision already made. Ava's mouth tasted like metal. She looked at Noah and tried to speak, but her throat tightened around every sound. Noah didn't react the way people expected fear to look. He didn't pace. He didn't curse. He simply stood very still on the sidewalk, eyes down, shoulders tight, breathing slow in counted steps. Ava realized he was doing something deliberate, preventing his nervous system from tipping into overload. It was the quietest kind of strength, the kind that didn't look like bravery until you understood what it cost. Marissa spoke quickly, planning, but Ava heard her words through a fog. Ava's mind kept circling one thought like a moth around a porch light. What will my son remember about this? That night, Ava tucked her son into bed and read the same storybook twice because he asked, and because she needed the repetition too. His small fingers gripped her sleeve at the end. "Are we okay?" he asked, voice soft, eyes searching her face the way children do when they sense a crack. Ava smiled and nodded, and it felt like placing a fragile glass on a shaking table. "We're okay," she whispered. She kissed his forehead and stayed for a moment longer than usual, watching his eyelids flutter as sleep claimed him. When she finally stepped out, her smile fell off her face like it had weight. In the kitchen, Ava opened her laptop and saw Noah's email in her inbox because he had copied her. The subject line was simple: recorded evidence and tenant harassment. No dramatic words. No begging. Just a name for what was happening. Attached were audio clips, transcripts, screenshots of emails, and a clean timeline. Ava scrolled and felt her chest tighten with something like grief. This was what survival looked like now. Organizing cruelty into documents. She saw Noah's timestamps, his careful notes about voices and phrases, and she felt ashamed for every time she had assumed quiet people had nothing to say. Marissa called late, voice low. "The reporter is moving," she said. "They're verifying now." Ava's stomach flipped. Verification meant the story was becoming real to the outside world, leaving the building's little ecosystem of whispers. "Will my name be in it?" Ava asked. The question came out small, almost childish, and she hated that fear could shrink her like that. "Not unless you choose," Marissa replied. "But your building may become recognizable." Ava stared at the wall and imagined strangers pointing at her life like it was entertainment. Then she imagined her son losing his home because she stayed silent. The moral dilemma pressed on her like a hand: privacy or protection. Before dawn, Ava woke to a buzzing phone and a pounding heart. A message from Marissa. They pulled the meeting forward. "Check your door." Ava swung her legs out of bed and walked to the entryway, every step feeling too loud. On the floor sat an envelope. Thick, official, her name printed cleanly. She picked it up and felt its weight. Not just paper, but intention. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a notice of non-renewal, dressed in formal language, citing community harmony and documented concerns. Ava's vision blurred. Non-renewal meant eviction with manners. Across the hall, Noah's door opened. He stood there in the dim morning light, hair slightly damp as if he had already showered, already braced for war in his own quiet way. Ava held up the notice, and Noah's face tightened with something that looked like regret. Not because he acted, because he knew this was the predictable response to truth. Retaliation wearing a tie. "They're trying to race the story," Ava whispered. Noah nodded once. "They want the ending written before the audience arrives," he said, and Ava felt chills because the metaphor was too accurate. If they could remove her before the article came out, they could call it coincidence. By 8, Marissa arrived at the building with another advocate and a calm energy that made Ava feel less alone. They took photos of the notice, documented dates, and sent immediate responses. Still, Ava couldn't stop her body from shaking. Her nervous system didn't trust paperwork because paperwork was what threatened her. In the hallway, neighbors peeked from doors, eyes darting, then vanishing. Ava saw fear on their faces too. Fear of being seen near her, fear of becoming the next sticker on a doorframe. The building felt like a room full of people pretending they weren't listening. At noon, the reporter's article went live online. The headline didn't name Ava, but it named the company. It quoted the audio. It described the pattern: pressure tactics, targeted tenants, manipulation through concern. Comments began to appear. Some people expressed outrage. Some demanded investigations. Some did what people always did when they were safe behind a screen. They doubted the victims to protect their belief that the world was fair. Ava read one comment that said, "If she can't pay, she should leave," and felt her chest burn. Then she read another, "This is predatory," and felt a strange warmth. Validation didn't fix rent, but it loosened shame's grip. By late afternoon, something shifted in the building. A maintenance man Ava had never seen before arrived with a new master key set and avoided eye contact with everyone. Karen walked through the lobby with her phone pressed to her ear, face pale, her usual gentle expression gone. Two executives came in with tight smiles, speaking in urgent whispers. The air felt charged, like the building itself had finally been seen. Ava stood near the mailboxes holding her son's hand, feeling his small fingers squeeze hers. He looked up at her, confused by the tension he couldn't name. Then, as if the world had decided to test whether justice existed, the corporate counsel from yesterday arrived. He didn't stride in confidently this time. He moved fast, speaking to the executives with clipped urgency. Papers changed hands. Voices rose, then dropped when people noticed phones recording from a distance. Marissa stood beside Ava, calm and ready. "They'll try to offer a settlement," she murmured. "They'll want you quiet." Ava swallowed. Quiet had been her default for years. Quiet had kept her alive. But quiet had almost cost her everything. Ava watched Noah step forward slightly, still not making a scene, simply placing himself where he could be seen. He held a folder in his hands, neat and complete. He didn't glare. He didn't posture. He just stood there like a fact. The corporate counsel's eyes flicked toward him and away, like looking at Noah now carried risk. Ava realized Noah's quiet move wasn't the email. It wasn't the recording. It was the refusal to disappear when they tried to make him small. That refusal forced everyone else to see what they'd been avoiding. That evening, an email arrived from the company's regional office. The non-renewal was under review, the wellness evaluation was canceled, and all tenant complaints related to Ava and Noah were being reassessed due to procedural irregularities. The language was stiff, but Ava read the subtext. They were trying to contain fallout. Marissa warned her it wasn't over, that companies often offered concessions to prevent accountability. But Ava felt something new in her chest, an unfamiliar steadiness. For the first time, Fear wasn't the only force moving her. In the following days, repairs suddenly happened in the building. Real repairs, not promised ones. A new manager appeared, overly formal, eager to be seen as fair. Notices disappeared from the bulletin board. The clear stickers stopped appearing on door frames. Neighbors began to make eye contact again, tentative at first, then longer, as if shame had been replaced by cautious respect. Mrs. Klein left a handwritten note at Ava's door that said only, "I'm sorry," and Ava held it for a long time, feeling the complicated truth. People could be weak and still worth forgiving. One afternoon, as Ava walked her son home from school, he stopped near Noah's door and waved. Noah froze for a half-second, then raised his hand and waved back, small, careful, genuine. Ava watched the exchange and felt tears sting her eyes, not from sadness, but from the quiet miracle of belonging. In a world that tried to sort people into disposable categories, two targeted neighbors had refused the labels. They had insisted on being human in a system built to treat them like problems. Ava didn't feel like a hero. She still checked her bank balance with a knot in her stomach. She still jumped when unknown numbers called. But she had learned something that stayed with her like a light under the ribs. Shame thrives in isolation, and dignity grows when witnessed. Noah had shown her that power didn't always look like loud confidence. Sometimes it looked like a man who spoke softly, kept careful notes, and refused to let anyone rewrite what happened in the dark. And once the truth had been carried into the open, it didn't just protect Ava and Noah, it made the whole building a little harder to hunt. If Ava and Noah's struggle felt real, the fear of losing home, dignity, and stability, subscribe for more stories like this. Hit like to support the channel, and write in the comments what part of their fight stayed with you the most.